Stories of an Aircraft Builder. In the summer of 2007, just 12 months after the start of the construction, the 3 Fokker D.VIIIs were already so far advanced that I was able to present them to the public. Shortly afterwards, in November 2007, they were shipped to New Zealand. But they were far from finished yet. Although they were not yet finished, they were wanted in New Zealand in advance, because they wanted to speed up things. They decided to manufacture all the missing parts themselves at their Wairarapa Aviation Limited, according to my plans. The original plan was for me to make everything for the airplanes except the wings and the engines. But this meant that the 2 planes and the rather bulky wings were out of the way at least. But then things turned out differently, as usual. Because a short time later I was informed by Gene DeMarco that they had decided to have all the other missing parts made here at my place as well. That was of course an adventure and something I'm very proud of in retrospect. There were 3 airplanes of the same design, but 3 individually hand-built airplanes. There can be deviations in the design that prevent assembly in the end. Not even Airbus has managed something like this really well with all the distributed production sites. I now only had my cuckoo of the 3 airplanes left at my place, and as it was just as advanced as the others, the theory was simple. Everything that was missing was built 3 times and adapted and fitted to cuckoo as a master pattern. I used up the most unattractive of these 3 parts each for my airplane and packed the more beautiful ones for New Zealand. It wasn't a small amount of parts still that has to be done, and so I built all the parts for airplanes that couldn't have been further away. Every meter further away would have brought them closer to me again. Meanwhile, the construction of the D.VII and D.III was resumed. As I was now mainly working on the wings, I also started building the wing for my cuckoo. Shirley did a lot of work on this. When the installations for the completion of the entire fuselages of the remaining D.VIIIs were finished, I set mine up in my workshop. In the meantime, components of all the important Fokker war types were spread out there. The M series was represented by the E3, the V series by the DR1, D7 and D8, a phenomenal sight. When all the missing internals for the D8 had been completed for New Zealand, they were neatly packed and prepared for shipment. In the meantime, construction of the Rumpler C4 had begun in New Zealand, based on the plans that I and Hartmut drew up in the evening. When it came to the tailplane and aileron components, which were made of tubular steel, I received an order from New Zealand to procure metric steel tubing in the qualities used at the time for all components, which I then did. They were to be sent to New Zealand together with the D8 parts. Shortly before the shipping date, I was asked if I could perhaps produce the streamline-shaped undercarriage tubes for the legs of the heavy Rumpler C4 on my self-built forming machine. I wanted to give it a try. After all, my forming machine was not designed for heavy tubes of almost 80 mm diameter and 2 mm wall thickness. But it worked quite well, and so I made all these tubes that were somehow profiled for the Rumpler C4. When I placed my order for the steel tubes, I asked in New Zealand if I could add the steel tubes for a full set of tail feathers and ailerons at my own expense so that the set could be built for me at their place. No problem, they said. I had no intention of building a C4 myself, but you never know, so at least the foundations had been laid. Steel tube and the 8 components were loaded into a container. During my first visit to New Zealand, I spent most of the time in the workshop there, and there was a large anvil missing. They have never been easy to come by, and I still had a 140 kilogram heavy comrade in the corner that was too big for me. I talked to Gene DeMarco and the workshop managers, and they were happy about this gesture. The block was out of my way, and the guys got something out of it. Small gifts keep friendships alive. Most of the time. A short jump back to the moment when the D.VIII was not yet shipped to New Zealand. Shortly before that, I gave a short interview for a radio program, and shortly afterwards I organized an open day at which the aircraft were presented to the public for the last time on German soil. Many people attended, including Peter Kohaus again, who reported on this in the issue number 2 of 2008 of the magazine Flugzeug Classic, when the planes were long gone already. I will play back the interview after the article, which I will now read out for you. Have fun with it. It was issued in the second issue of 2008 of magazine Flugzeug Classic under the caption Reproductions, subheading Fokker Replicas. Historic Fokker Forge. Aircraft construction as it was 90 years ago. If you want to know how airplanes were built in 1918, you have to go to Schorndorf near Stuttgart. There, in his Aeroplanbau, Achim Engels painstakingly builds airworthy Fokker E.3, D.VII and D.VIII aircraft by hand using the production methods of the time. 2 D.VIIIs were delivered to New Zealand at the beginning of November 2007. At the beginning of 2006, Achim Engels was actually busy building several Fokker D.VIIs and E.3s. 2 D.VIIs were already relatively far advanced. One is intended for the collector Oliver Wolf, who lives in England, and the fuselage had already undergone test runs with an original 160 horsepower Daimler D3 in the fall of 2004. Then came a request from New Zealand. A lively scene with aircraft from the First World War has been developing there for several years. There is the impressive Aviation Heritage Center in Omaka, with lifelike dioramas of scenes from the First World War, which were designed by the makers of the film Lord of the Rings. Flying days with up to 7 Fokker DR1 information are probably unique in the world. The prospective customer from New Zealand had bought 2 wings for the monoplane and now needed 2 matching fuselages, preferably made in Germany. After consulting with his other customers, Achim Engels then switched his production to D.VIII and began building 3 fuselages. The third is destined for himself. The production methods used were those of 1918. Based on surviving original Fokker factory drawings and plans made after 1918 in Italy from captured D.VIIIs. The Museo dell'Aeronautica Giovanni Caproni in Trento is also home to the world's last remaining original fuselage of a Fokker D.VIII. As it is on display uncovered, it makes a special ideal object for study. The fuselages were autogenously welded, as they were at the time, and were painted in the usual olive green paint. All attached parts are painted black. This was prescribed at the time to make maintenance easier. The only concession to modern times is an additional primer coat on the 2 fuselages for New Zealand, which was requested as corrosion protection due to the marine climate there. The D.VIIIs are not complete and will be delivered as shells. Remaining work, such as outfitting, covering and painting, will be carried out in New Zealand. Original rotary engines from Gnome Rhone or Oberursel are to be used for propulsion. The aircraft will also be inspected there. In 2006, Achim Engels had already been to New Zealand, and following a demonstration of his craftsmanship, his company was certified for construction. The project in Germany are also under strict supervision by a building inspector and are registered as experimentals with the OUV, the Oscar Ursinus Association. In October 2007, the 3 fuselages were completed to such an extent that Achim Engels was able to assemble them at an open day and present them together with the wings. 3 true to original Fokker D.VIIIs in one place is truly an impressive sight. A visit to the 200 square meter wooden hangar, which was filled with fuselages, wings and assemblies for Fokker D.VII and E3, completely transported the visitors back to aircraft construction of 1918. Wings from a luminary. The 2 wings for the D.VIII were made by none other than the cabinet maker Koloman Meyerhofer from Austria, who has already made a name for himself in specialist circles with his excellent replicas of the Albatros D3. Achim Engels is also enthusiastic about the wings. However, the 35-year-old will build the wings for his own D8 himself. The aircraft was transported to New Zealand at the beginning of November. Engels has been self-taught in aircraft construction for years. It all started at the end of the 1980s with the 1:6 scale model of the Fokker D.VIII and the realization that building a 1:1 scale model couldn't be much more difficult. Engels and his friends only really got into historic aircraft construction in 1990 with an order from the Auto and Technic Museum at Sinsheim for the construction of a Fokker D.VIII triplane. This also marked the birth of the Fokker Team Schorndorf. But first there was painstaking research to create documentation. Original factory drawings and data sheets from the German Inspectorate of the Army Air Service, Eidflieg, were found in archives, as well as reports in the magazine Flugsport from the 1920s and the English trade journals, which were created after analyzing looted aircraft. Complete drawing sets from the USA were already available on the market to enable private aircraft manufacturers to produce an airworthy Richthofen triplane. Unfortunately, they often turned out to be inaccurate and adapted to today's regulations. Engels therefore created and reconstructed his own documentation because he wanted to build and work according to the building regulations of the time right from the start. The collection now also includes numerous documents on other types of aircraft up to 1918. Much of this was also the result of experiments and reconstructing during construction itself, learning by doing. Welding, sheet metal working, splicing of tension ropes, timber construction, and much more was developed through self-study and practical experiments after consulting historical reference books. Valuable tips on metalworking were also provided by experts such as a blacksmith. From the back room to the large hall. Initially, construction took place in various locations, such as the back room of a store, then in an industrial building that was barely younger than the type of the aircraft being built, and the final assembly took place in the garden of a school friend's house in the open air. In June 1992, the triplane was then transported to the Technikmuseum Speyer, where it is still on display today in the reconstructed livery of the Richthofen aircraft with the order number 152-17. Alongside this, Achim Engels began publishing books and CDs on aircraft from the period up to 1920. He also launched the website www.fokker-team-schorndorf.de, where you can find out about the status of his aircraft construction and his products. This was followed by a period of aircraft construction in a blacksmith shop in Schorndorf and vocational training as a railroad conductor. He worked on the Stuttgart-Aalen line for 6 years. Flying initially remained an important hobby. He began building 2 more Fokker D.VIIs. In 2003 he quit his job at the railroad and set up his own business for historic aircraft construction in an industrial area in the north of Schorndorf. The reason for this was an order from Oliver Wolf for the construction of a Fokker D.VII. Engels initially set up a metal construction workshop, a room for woodworking, and an office in the new premises. Some historical metal working machines were also purchased. Finally, at the beginning of 2006, the large new wooden hall was added, which offers considerably better working conditions. As it is unheated, Achim Engels has to adapt his work to the seasons. Experience has shown that a certain minimum temperature is required for activities such as gluing, covering and painting. The work lasts for years. For the most part, Achim carries out his work at Engels Aeroplanbau alone. He is assisted by his partner, Alexandra Lansky, who mainly does covering work, in proper style on an old foot-operated Pfaff sewing machine, but also builds small, elaborate pedal planes for children. His father and friends from the former Fokker team Schorndorf also help with the work. He has now been working to capacity for years. He has a total of 12 orders to complete. Payment is made in installments according to the progress of the work. However, due to the special features of historic aircraft construction, it is almost impossible to calculate completion dates. The master now takes off himself. Since September 2007, Achim Engels has also had his own pilot's license, as he would like to fly some of his replica aircraft later on. Initially, he was looking for a small tailwheel aircraft such a Piper Cub. Then he came across a small Air Macchi MB308. Although it has a nose wheel landing gear, it dates back to 1948 and is therefore also a genuine vintage aircraft. He uses it to gain his flying experience from the Aalen-Elchingen airfield. A visit to the site of the former Fokker factory in Schwerin also brought Achim Engels a special memento, a dusty original sign from 1918 with the inscription Hall 2. It was still hanging in one of the hangars there at the Lake Schwerin. This now adorns the hall in Schorndorf. There are also various enlarged photos of Fokker productions from 1918 hanging on the wall. If you compare them with the sight of the aircraft parts in the hangar, you really do feel like you've been transported back 90 years. Written by Peter W. Kohaus. Sieht natürlich alles etwas chaotisch aus, vor allem wenn wir gerade dabei sind, einen Flieger nach Neuseeland zu verschiffen. Die Flugzeuge, die werden ausschließlich so gebaut, wie sie damals gebaut wurden. Selbes Material, selbe Verarbeitung, also handwerklich, ohne Kompromisse an moderne Werkstoffe oder Verfahrensweisen.
Achim Engels ist Anfang 40, Autodidakt und macht in seiner Werkstatt alles selbst. Er ist technischer Zeichner, Schreiner, Zimmermann, Schlosser und Sattler zugleich. Sein Spezialgebiet sind deutsche Flugzeugmodelle, die von der Jahrhundertwende bis zum Ende des Ersten Weltkrieges gebaut wurden. Aber auf den ersten Blick sieht seine Werkstatt aus wie ein ganz normaler Handwerksbetrieb. Ein kleiner Büroraum vorne an der Straße, dahinter eine Metall- und eine Holzwerkstatt und etwas zurückgesetzt eine Halle. Für Achim Engels ist Flugzeugebauen ein Lebenstraum. Das macht er voller Begeisterung und ohne jeden Stress seit gut 25 Jahren. Und er erklärt, dass jeder Flugzeuge bauen kann. Es geht nämlich ganz einfach.
Schraubenbolzen, Stahlrohre und ein bisschen Holz. Alles nur in der richtigen Reihenfolge zusammengenagelt und zusammengeklebt. Das ist nicht weiter kompliziert. Da kommen keine Probleme auf dich zu. Da kommt immer nur ganz genau ein Problem auf dich zu. Und das wird gelöst. Und dann kommt wieder nur ein Problem auf dich zu. Und das wird gelöst. Und so läuft man durch das ganze Projekt durch. Es ist nicht eine überwältigende Anzahl von Problemen, deren Lösung man noch nicht sieht. Es ist immer nur jetzt das, was ansteht.
Und am Ende ist es ein Flugzeug. Im Moment steht eine fast fertige Fokker D.VIII in der Halle. Nur die Tragflächen sind noch nicht angebracht und bespannt. Aber wie kommt man nun genau bis zu diesem Punkt?
Also am Anfang steht die Recherche. Ich muss erst mal gucken, wo kriege ich Zeichnungen her? Oder wo stehen Flugzeuge noch in irgendwelchen Museen aus dieser Zeit, die man sich genau angucken und vermessen kann. Das ist einmal das eine. Mit dieser Grundlage werden dann neue Zeichnungen erstellt, die unter anderem beim Luftfahrtbundesamt dazu dienen, dass das Flugzeug überhaupt in die Luft kommen darf. Und dann das, was die Umsetzung ist. Die Firmen heute wissen nicht mehr, wie ihre Flugzeuge damals ausgesehen haben. Aber sie wissen auch nicht vom Handwerklichen her, wie es gemacht wird. Das heißt, ich bin darauf angewiesen, alte Fotos zu studieren aus der Zeit, die dieses Handwerk zeigen. Sprich Arbeiter, die Arbeiten durchführen, tatsächlich, die wurden ja auch fotografiert. Das heißt, man kann daraus schon ableiten, wie wurde es handwerklich gemacht.
Das Besondere an Achim Engels Maschinen ist eben diese Genauigkeit bei der Recherche. Und dann später beim Sägen, Schweißen, Schleifen, Nieten und Verleimen. Denn
es gibt viele Leute, die Flugzeuge bauen und es gibt viele Nachbauten von diesen Flugzeugen. Nur sehen die innen
ganz anders aus, wie das, was damals geflogen ist. Und da sage ich eben, nee, ich will wissen, warum ist die Schraube an der Stelle?
Ungefähr 2 Jahre braucht Achim Engels für ein neues Flugzeug. Das sind 4.000 bis 5.000 Arbeitsstunden. Und entsprechend teuer ist so eine Maschine natürlich. Auch wenn Achim Engels keine festen Preise nennt. Immer wenn er ein neues Modell für einen Kunden gefertigt hat, baut er auch eins für seine eigene Sammlung. Aber neben dem Spaß an seinem Beruf geht es Achim Engels um mehr. Er will den historischen Flugzeugbau bewahren. Das Wissen, das er in akribischer Recherche gesammelt und erarbeitet hat, soll nicht wieder verloren gehen. Denn momentan gibt es nur eine Handvoll Flugzeugbauer weltweit, die so ein Wissen haben.
Weil die meisten, die in der Form irgendwas machen, sind eher eigenbrötlerisch. Die sagen, nein, ich weiß, wie es geht und ich behalte es für mich, ich lasse nur keinen reingucken. Könnt mir ja was klauen. Und ich sehe es anders. Wenn die jungen Leute kommen wollen, sollen sie mitarbeiten, weil irgendwann überfährt mich ein Auto oder ich fahre mit meinem Flugzeug vom Himmel oder ich sterbe an Altersschwäche. Ja, wer macht es denn dann weiter, wenn es keiner kann? Und man muss ja weitergeben. Ne? Also ich habe keine Angst vor Konkurrenz. Und selbst wenn er es besser macht wie ich, ja warum nicht? Und wenn ich es ihm dann auch noch beigebracht habe, ja dann bin ich doch eher stolz drauf.